The conference room on the 18th floor of Blackscale Logistics Corporation felt colder than the rain streaking down the floor-to-ceiling glass walls outside. White LED panels overhead cast a flat, unforgiving light that sharpened every edge, the polished oak table, the rows of black leather chairs, the faint scuffs on the carpet where too many anxious feet had paced during previous reviews. The air carried the stale trace of machine-brewed coffee, someone's citrus cologne, and the faint, metallic tang of nervous sweat. Beyond the glass, Valadorn's skyline blurred under a steady autumn drizzle, car lights smearing red and gold across wet streets far below. I was 23, the youngest analyst in the Route Compliance and Data Division, and I had learned early that silence and the right kind of deference kept a person alive longer than raw talent or courage. I stood near the back row tablet, gripped in both hands, thumb hovering over the screen that still displayed the final log files from the doomed Hemdaden run. My pulse beat steady but loud in my ears. At the center of the room, framed by the curved wall of cameras, Vraka stood motionless. She was taller than most of the men, present shoulders broad yet tapered at the waist, skin a muted gray-green that caught the light like damp stone. Her black hair had been pulled back into a tight knot at the nape of her neck, though a few strands had escaped and clung to the damp skin of her throat. 2 fresh red marks circled her wrists, where the security cuffs had bitten in. A thin cut traced the left side of her cheekbone, the dried blood dark as rust against the sharper line of her jaw. Her amber eyes looked straight through every face in the room, neither defiant nor pleading, simply present, enduring. Garrick Morn, head of field security, leaned against the table's edge with the easy confidence of a man who had never lost a fight in front of witnesses. His pressed shirt stretched across a thick chest. The faint scent of rain and gun oil still clung to him. "This is the one they're calling the Orc Jinx," he said, voice amplified by the lapel mic. "Every convoy she touches ends in blood or missing cargo. 3 major contracts in the last 30 days gone." A low ripple of murmurs swept the room. Someone near the front let out a short, ugly laugh. Bram Halwer, the project director, tapped the microphone once with a thick finger. The sound cracked through the speakers like a judge's gavel. "Company policy is clear. Anyone willing to assume responsibility for her placement support role on routes, warehouse detail, night logistics, speak now. Otherwise, we process termination under standard protocol." Garrick's mouth curved. "I'll take her. My team's short on night shift muscle." A couple of men in the front row exchanged glances and smirked. The word muscle carried an extra weight that made my stomach tighten. I felt the tablet's edge press into my palms. I knew the logs on my screen better than anyone. I had cross-checked every timestamp, every GPS ping, every anomaly that the official report had smoothed away. Vraka had not caused those losses. She had documented them quietly, persistently, until someone decided she was the problem. And I knew Garrick. 3 years ago, his routine route adjustment had sent my brother's convoy straight into an ambush that never should have happened. The company had called it bad luck. I had never believed them. The room waited. The rain tapped harder against the glass. I stepped out of the back row. My shoes made a soft, deliberate sound on the carpet. Heads turned. I set the tablet down on the nearest table with a quiet click that somehow carried farther than Garrick's amplified voice had. "I choose her." Silence dropped like a weight. Bram's small eyes narrowed behind his glasses. "Aaron Vale." I kept walking until I stood in the open space between the front row and the central cameras. The light felt brighter here, exposing every wrinkle in my cheap dress shirt, the ink stain on my left cuff from yesterday's late filing. According to internal regulations 17B, any employee who preserves complete route compliance data for a failed high-value run is entitled to select one internal asset as compensation. I preserved the full log set for the Hemdaden shipment. I choose Vraka. Garrick straightened the smirk sliding off his face like grease. The data kid wants to square off with me. I did not look at him. My gaze stayed on Bram. I selected first. That's the rule. Bram studied me for a long moment. The wall clock behind him ticked once, twice. Rain traced slow paths down the glass. Finally, he exhaled through his nose. "She's yours until senior leadership rules otherwise. If she causes any disruption, financial, operational, reputational, You answer for it personally." A low buzz of voices rose and fell around the room. I heard my name whispered in tones that ranged from disbelief to contempt. I kept moving until I stood directly in front of Vraka. Up close, she was even taller. I had to tilt my head slightly. Her breathing remained even, but I noticed the faint tremor in the muscle along her forearm, the way her fingers flexed once, as if testing whether the cuffs were truly gone. I reached into my pocket, produced the electronic key card, and pressed it to the lock on her right wrist. The cuff released with a soft electronic chirp. I repeated the motion on the left. The metal fell away and clattered onto the carpet. For the first time, her amber eyes focused fully on my face. Her voice came low, rough from disuse or cold. "Why I don't want Garrick to have you." One corner of her mouth twitched too brief to call a smile, too sharp to ignore. "That's not a good answer." I shrugged out of my charcoal overcoat and held it open. She studied it for 2 full seconds before sliding her arms into the sleeves. The coat looked smaller on her, the shoulders pulling tight, yet she drew it around herself with a quiet dignity that made the rest of the room feel suddenly shabby. We turned together toward the double glass doors. Behind us, Garrick's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade dragged across concrete. "You're going to regret this, Aaron." I paused at the threshold, one hand resting on the cool metal frame. Rainlight flickered across the glass. I did not turn around. "My brother regretted trusting your route report 3 years ago. I still remember the exact date." The doors hissed open. We stepped into the wide corridor lined with abstract corporate art and potted ferns. Fluorescent strips hummed overhead. Our footsteps echoed in unison, my dress shoes, her heavy boots that someone had allowed her to keep. No one followed us immediately, but I felt the weight of every gaze through the glass walls. At the elevator bank, I pressed the call button. The arrow glowed orange. Vraka stood beside me, the borrowed coat still settling on her frame. She smelled faintly of rain and something sharper, ozone maybe, or the antiseptic they used in the holding rooms. The elevator arrived with a soft ding. We stepped inside. The doors closed, sealing us in mirrored quiet. I watched the floor numbers descend in the reflection. 23 years old, and I had just burned the only bridge I had ever managed to build inside this company. I waited for the regret to hit. It didn't. Instead, I felt something quieter, steadier. Something that had been waiting under the surface of all those careful silences. Vraka's reflection met my eyes in the polished steel. She did not speak again, but the small cut on her cheek caught the light each time the elevator passed a floor. When the doors opened on the ground-level lobby, the city's damp night air rolled in through the revolving doors. I held one side open for her. She stepped through without hesitation. Outside, the rain had eased into a fine mist that clung to our skin. Streetlights painted long reflections on the wet pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a siren rose and fell, ordinary and indifferent. I buttoned the single remaining button on my shirt against the chill, and started walking toward the employee parking garage. Vraka matched my pace, the overcoat sleeves brushing her thighs. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft rhythm of our footsteps and the distant murmur of traffic. For the first time in years, I was not calculating how to stay invisible. I was simply walking beside someone who refused to disappear, and that I realized was enough to begin with. The studio apartment on the outskirts of Valadorn was smaller than I remembered. Rain drummed steadily against the single narrow window, turning the city lights outside into blurred streaks of neon and sodium yellow. Inside, the space felt even tighter, one room with a pull-out sofa that doubled as my bed, a kitchenette barely wide enough for 2 people to stand side by side, and a low desk cluttered with spare chargers and half-finished reports. The air carried the faint smell of yesterday's takeout noodles and the clean, sharp scent of rain leaking through the old sealant around the window frame. A single floor lamp in the corner cast a warm circle of light that didn't quite reach the far wall. Vraka stepped inside after me and stopped just past the threshold. She didn't sit. She didn't even loosen the overcoat I had given her. Instead, she stood with her back to the closed door, shoulders squared, boots planted on the cheap linoleum, as if the floor might shift beneath her at any second. Water glistened on the dark strands of hair that had escaped her knot and clung to the side of her neck. The cut on her cheek looked darker in this softer light, the dried blood flaking at the edges. I locked the door, slid the deadbolt, and set my keys on the counter with a small clink. The sound seemed louder than it should have. "You can sit," I said. Or take the coat off. Whatever feels right. She didn't move. Her amber eyes tracked me as I crossed to the desk, opened my laptop, and powered it on. The screen glowed blue-white, reflecting off the rain-streaked window. I could feel her watching every motion, how I plugged in the charger, how I flexed my fingers once before typing my password. After a long minute, she reached up with both hands, worked something at the base of her skull, and pulled a small black USB drive free. A thin layer of protective wax still clung to it. She crossed the room in 3 quiet steps and placed the drive on the desk beside my hand. Her fingers were cool from the rain, calloused at the tips. "Open it," she said. Her voice was low, almost conversational, but the undercurrent of exhaustion ran through it like a fault line. I inserted the drive. The folder opened immediately. No password, no encryption visible, just raw files. The first one was a route log for the hem.n shipment, except the timestamps had been altered by nearly 40 minutes. The second was a ledger of facilitation payments routed through an offshore shell account. The amounts were staggering. The recipients were listed only by code names I recognized from border incident reports groups known to hit logistics convoys with surgical precision. The third file contained internal emails between Gideon Vale, our finance director, and Garrick Morn. Dates, amounts, instructions. Clear as printed ink. I scrolled slowly, reading every line twice. My mouth had gone dry. Outside, a car passed on the wet street below, tires hissing. Vraka finally spoke again. She stayed standing, one hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. My father was senior route security advisor for Blackscale 4 years ago. He noticed the same pattern: routes changed at the last minute, cargo manifests edited after loading, payments appearing in accounts that didn't belong to any approved subcontractor. He started asking questions, quiet ones. Then one night his car went off the northern pass. Official report said mechanical failure. The orcs were blamed within hours. My clan became the convenient enemy. She paused. I heard her inhale once, slow and deliberate, as if measuring how much truth she could release at once. I took a low-level interpreter contract 6 months ago. Support staff on high-risk runs. I wasn't looking for glory. I was looking for proof. Every time something went wrong, I logged it. GPS discrepancies, unscheduled stops, radio silence, exactly where the ambush windows opened. They started calling me the Jinx because the numbers didn't lie and I wouldn't stop writing them down. Her fingers tightened on the chair back, the leather creaking faintly. Garrick handles the muscle. Gideon handles the money. Together they sell safe passage to the border crews and then file insurance claims on the losses. The company looks clean. The clans take the blame. Everyone gets paid except the drivers and the families left behind. I leaned back. The chair wheel squeaked once. Your father sent you the drive? He didn't get the chance, but he taught me where to look. And he taught me that the only people who can bury something this deep are the ones who already sit at the table. She nodded toward the screen. That last email chain, it references the exact convoy my father died on. Garrick signed off on the route change himself. I stared at the glowing lines until they blurred. My brother's face flickered behind my eyes. His last message, the one that had simply said, the new route felt off, but the bonus was too good to pass up. I closed the laptop lid with a soft click. The room fell back into the dim yellow of the floor lamp. Rain continued its steady rhythm against the glass. Vraka watched me. Not with expectation, not with hope, just with the steady patience of someone who had already accepted that most people walked away at this point. I stood up. The movement brought us closer than either of us had planned. I could smell the faint ozone on her skin from the rain and the antiseptic they had used on her wrists earlier. We need to get this to someone outside the company. Compliance oversight, maybe the city transport authority? A sharp triple knock sounded on the apartment door. Not the polite rap of a neighbor. 3 measured strikes, hard enough to rattle the frame. Vraka's posture changed instantly. She stepped sideways, putting the desk between herself and the door shoulders, dropping into a loose, ready stance. Her eyes flicked to the window, then to the fire escape access at the far end of the kitchenette. Security, I whispered. They move fast. Another knock, louder. A voice filtered through the wood. Garrick's second in command, the one who always smelled like cheap energy drinks and authority. Vale, open up. Routine welfare check on the asset you claimed. Vraka's gaze met mine. No panic, only calculation. I grabbed my jacket from the hook, shoved the USB into the inner pocket, and nodded toward the window. She moved first, silent as shadow. I followed, sliding the window open as quietly as the swollen frame allowed. Cold mist rolled in, carrying the smell of wet pavement and distant exhaust. The fire escape outside was narrow metal slick with rain. We stepped out together. The platform shivered under our combined weight. Below us, the alley stretched dark and empty except for a single flickering streetlight. Behind us, the apartment door shuddered once as someone tested the lock. Vraka went down the ladder first hands and boots, finding purchase with practiced ease. I followed heart hammering against the USB drive in my pocket. Rain soaked through my shirt in seconds. By the time we reached the ground, my shoes were full of water and my fingers were numb. We ran. Not the frantic sprint of panic, but the steady, low stride of people who knew they could not afford to be seen. Down the alley across a service road, through the back lot of a closed shipping depot. Streetlights caught the edges of Vraka's borrowed coat as it flared behind her. She kept pace with me effortlessly, breathing steady eyes, scanning every corner, every parked van, every shadowed doorway. We cut through the night market district where the 24-hour stalls were still open under plastic awnings. Steam rose from noodle pots and fried dough. The smell of garlic and hot oil mixed with the rain. A few late customers glanced up, but no one called out. We slipped between two food carts and into the deeper dark of an abandoned textile warehouse on the edge of the industrial block. The side door hung loose on one hinge. Inside, the space smelled of old machine oil and damp concrete. A single neon sign from the street outside bled red light through a cracked skylight high above. We stopped in the middle of the empty floor. Water dripped from our clothes onto the concrete in soft, irregular beats. Vraka leaned against a rusted support pillar, arms crossed, watching me. The red neon painted half her face in shifting light, the other half in shadow. The cut on her cheek glistened wet. I pulled the USB from my jacket and held it between us like a fragile offering. "This is real," I said. "I know it's real. But if we take it public, they'll come for both of us. Jobs, reputations, maybe more." She studied my face for a long time. The rain outside had eased into a whisper against the metal roof. Somewhere far off, a train horn sounded low and mournful. "I've already lost everything they could take from me," she said quietly. "My father, my clan's good name, 3 years of being called the Jinx so no one would listen. The only thing left is whether I let them keep winning." She pushed off the pillar and stepped closer until only an arm's length separated us. "The question is whether you're still willing to stand next to someone the entire company wants to erase." I felt the weight of the drive in my palm, the cold metal warming slowly against my skin. I thought about the conference room, the way her eyes had looked straight through every laughing face. I thought about my brother's last message and the way I had chosen silence for 3 years because it was safer. "I'm not walking away," I told her. The words came out steadier than I expected. "Not tonight, not tomorrow, not until we finish this." Vraka's expression didn't soften, but something shifted behind her eyes, subtle like the first crack in winter ice. She reached out and closed her fingers around the USB, with mine not taking it, just holding the moment between us. Her skin was still cool from the rain, but the grip was firm. "Then we move before dawn," she said. "There's a contact I trust in the transport authority, but we do it my way. Quiet, careful. No more grand gestures in front of cameras." I nodded. The neon sign flickered once, casting her shadow long across the concrete floor. For the first time since I had spoken up in that conference room, the weight in my chest felt different. Not lighter exactly, just shared. Outside, the rain kept falling steady and patient, washing the city clean in ways the company never would. Inside the warehouse, 2 people who should never have met stood side by side, holding the only proof that could burn it all down. And for now, that was enough to keep moving. The first gray light of morning crept through the cracked skylight of the abandoned warehouse like spilled milk. It wasn't bright enough to chase away the shadows pooling in the corners, but it was enough to show the damp footprints we had left across the concrete floor during the night. The air smelled of wet stone, old motor oil, and the faint metallic bite of rain that had seeped in through the roof. My back ached from leaning against the pillar for hours, but I hadn't slept. Neither had Vraka. She sat a few feet away on an overturned crate, elbows on her knees. The borrowed overcoat still wrapped around her shoulders like a second skin. Her breathing was slow and even, yet her amber eyes stayed open, fixed on the distant loading doors, as if she could see threats forming beyond them. I rubbed my face with both hands, feeling the stubble rasp against my palms. The USB drive pressed against my ribs inside my jacket pocket, a small hard weight that reminded me the night had not been a dream. "We should move before the morning shift starts," I said. My voice sounded rough, unused. Vraka nodded once. She stood without hurry, unfolding her tall frame with the same quiet economy of motion I had noticed in the conference room. No wasted energy, no unnecessary words. We slipped out through the same side door, stepping into the narrow alley where the rain had eased into a thin mist that clung to everything. The city was waking up around us, delivery trucks rumbling past on the main road. The distant clatter of metal shutters rolling open, the smell of fresh bread and frying oil, drifting from a corner stall 2 blocks away. By the time we reached the small cafe on the edge of the industrial district, the morning news had already begun to spread. I bought 2 coffees and 2 portions of steamed buns, with the last of the cash in my wallet. We sat at a plastic table outside under a faded awning, the steam from the cups curling up between us. Vraka kept her hood low, but it didn't matter. Someone at the next table glanced over, did a double take, and immediately pulled out their phone. I watched the screen light up as the man typed. Within 20 minutes, my own phone began to vibrate. First, a message from a colleague in compliance. "What the hell were you thinking?" Then another from someone I barely knew in logistics company group chat is exploding. "They're calling you a traitor." By the time we finished eating, the internal company feed was alive with posts. Screenshots of the conference room moment had leaked. Someone had recorded it on their phone. The caption read, "Junior analyst picks the orc Jinx in front of the entire leadership team. Career suicide speed run." The comments were worse. Some were crude, some were angry. A few were simply disappointed, as if I had personally betrayed every person who had ever kept their head down and done their job. Vraka read them over my shoulder without asking. Her expression didn't change, but I saw the muscle along her jaw tighten once. We left the cafe and walked toward the Transport Authority building 3 districts over. The streets grew busier. Office workers in crisp coats hurried past us, eyes flicking away when they noticed Vraka's height, the gray-green tone of her skin, the way she moved with the kind of contained power that made people step wider around her. At the crosswalk, a group of 3 young men in delivery uniforms slowed. One of them muttered something I couldn't hear. The second laughed. The third bent down, picked up a loose piece of broken pavement from the curb, and hurled it. It struck Vraka's shoulder with a dull thud. She didn't flinch. The coat absorbed most of the impact, but I saw her breath catch for half a second. "Hey!" I stepped forward, voice sharper than I intended. "What the hell is wrong with you?" The man shrugged, already walking away. "Just helping the company clean house." His friends laughed again, the sound thin and nervous. The kind of laugh people make when they know they're being watched by others on the street. More phones came out. Someone filmed us. Vraka touched my arm lightly, barely a contact, just enough to pull me back. "Don't," she said under her breath. "It only gives them more to post." We kept walking. The second stone came from behind us near the next intersection. It missed, clattering against a metal trash bin. A woman shouted from an upper window, telling the kids to stop, but her voice lacked conviction. By the time we reached the quieter side street that led toward Mara Fenn's old repair shop, my shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool air, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Mara's shop sat at the end of a narrow lane lined with faded shipping containers turned into storage units. She was an older orc woman, broad across the shoulders, with silver threading through her dark braid and a scar that pulled one corner of her mouth into a permanent half-smile. She had worked logistics for Blackscale for 20 years before they quietly pushed her out. When she opened the rolling door and saw us standing there, wet, tired, and marked by the city, she didn't ask questions. She simply stepped aside and let us in. The workshop smelled of grease-hot metal and strong tea. Tools hung in neat rows along the walls. A small electric kettle hissed on a workbench. Mara poured 3 mugs without being asked, then sat on a stool and looked at us the way a mechanic looks at an engine that has clearly been driven too hard. So she said, voice low and gravelly, the boy who never caused trouble, finally decided to cause some. She nodded toward Vraka. And you. I've heard the name. The Jinx. You carrying proof or just bad luck? Vraka set her mug down untouched. She reached inside the overcoat, pulled out the USB drive, and placed it on the workbench between us. Proof, she said simply. Mara plugged it into an old rugged laptop she kept for diagnostics. She scrolled in silence for a long time, the blue light reflecting off her tusks. Every few seconds, she made a small sound in the back of her throat. Disbelief, recognition, anger. When she finally looked up, her eyes were hard. I knew Gideon was dirty. I didn't know how deep. This goes all the way to the board's quiet accounts. She leaned back. You two are already burning. The company feed is calling for your termination. Security is probably watching every camera within 5 blocks of this shop by now. I felt the words settle in my stomach like cold lead. We need someone who can verify the files officially. Someone outside? Mara's gaze shifted to Vraka. You trust him? Vraka looked at me, then really looked the way she had in the warehouse when the neon painted half her face red. He chose me in front of all of them when he didn't have to. That's more than most have done. Something tight in my chest loosened at her words. Not relief exactly, just the knowledge that she had noticed, that it mattered. Mara stood and began gathering a few tools into a small bag. There's an old contact of mine, Yisradel. Used to run data integrity before they fired her for asking too many questions. She lives near the Eastern Freight Yards. If anyone can help you get these files in front of the right people without the company burying them first, it's her. We left the shop 20 minutes later with fresh clothes Mara had pulled from a back closet, plain work jackets that smelled faintly of machine oil, and a paper map with Isra's address circled in red. The rain had stopped completely, but the streets still glistened. As we walked, the city felt different. Every passing car seemed to slow a fraction. Every pedestrian glanced longer than necessary. At one point, Vraka spoke without looking at me. You can still walk away. Tell them I forced you. Tell them I stole the drive. They'll believe it. Orcs are always the villains in their stories. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. A bicycle swerved around us. I'm not walking away. She turned to face me fully. The cut on her cheek had started to scab over a thin, dark line against the gray-green of her skin. Why? The question was the same one she had asked in the conference room, but softer now, weighted with something I couldn't name. I thought about the stones, about the laughter, about the way she had stood motionless in that circle of cameras while the entire room decided she was disposable. Because I've spent 3 years telling myself that staying quiet was the smart choice. Because I watched my brother's name get written off as bad luck, while the people who sent him there kept collecting bonuses. Because the first time I chose not to stay quiet, it felt like breathing for the first time in years. I swallowed. And because I don't want to go back to being the guy who looks away. Vraka studied me for a long moment. The wind moved a loose strand of her hair across her forehead. Then she did something I didn't expect. She reached out and brushed a small piece of dried mud from my sleeve. The touch was brief, almost impersonal, but it lingered in the air between us like a question neither of us was ready to ask yet. Then we keep walking, she said. We did? The freight yards were another hour on foot. By the time we reached the row of low concrete buildings where Isra lived, the afternoon light had turned the puddles into sheets of dull silver. My legs ached. My mind kept replaying the sound of the stone hitting Vraka's shoulder. But every time the doubt crept in, I looked at the woman walking beside me, tall, silent, carrying the weight of an entire clan's ruined reputation on her back. And the doubt retreated a little further. We still had a long way to go before anyone would listen. We still had the company hunting us, the city watching, and the truth sitting like a live wire in my pocket. But for the first time since I had stood up in that conference room, I wasn't walking alone. And that made all the difference. The glass and steel tower of Blackscale Logistics rose against the afternoon sky like a blade driven into the heart of Valadorn. From the service entrance, 2 blocks away, it looked exactly as it always had. Cold efficient, untouchable. Rain had returned in a thin veil coating the sidewalks and turning every reflection into a smear of light. My work jacket from Mara's shop felt too tight across the shoulders, the fabric still carrying the faint scent of machine oil and old metal. Vraka walked beside me, hood pulled low, her borrowed coat buttoned high. We moved with the flow of the late afternoon shift change delivery drivers, warehouse staff, tired analysts clutching coffee cups. No one looked at us twice. Not yet. We slipped through the loading dock at the rear, the same one I had used 100 times, to check incoming manifests. The security camera in the corner had a blind spot if you hugged the left wall. I had mapped it months ago without ever thinking I would need it for something like this. Vreka followed my lead, her boots making almost no sound on the concrete. The smell of diesel and wet cardboard filled the air. A forklift rumbled past its driver, nodding once at me out of habit before his eyes widened and he looked away fast. We took the freight elevator down 2 levels to the sub-basement server vault. The doors opened onto a long corridor lit by harsh fluorescent strips that buzzed like trapped insects. The air here was colder, drier heavy, with the low hum of cooling fans. I swiped my old employee card at the first checkpoint. It still worked. They hadn't had time to revoke everything. Yet. The server room door required a second scan. I pressed my thumb to the pad and held my breath. Green light. We stepped inside. Rows of black racks stretched into the dimness, blinking with tiny blue and amber eyes. The temperature dropped another few degrees. Vraka closed the door behind us and stood watch while I moved to the far rack, the one that held the offline backup drives no one was supposed to touch without director-level clearance. My fingers shook only once as I pulled the physical drive labeled Root Integrity Archive, Restricted. I slotted it into the portable reader Mara had given us, copied the unedited files, then swapped it for the tampered versions I had prepared on a blank drive from my pocket. The swap took 43 seconds. I counted every one. Vraka's voice came soft in the humming dark. Done. Done. We left the same way we had come, the new drive now burning in my jacket like a live coal. Back on the street, the city noise wrapped around us again, honking cars, the wet slap of tires, distant sirens. My heart still hadn't slowed. The emergency board meeting had already started on the 18th floor. We knew because the internal alert had pinged every remaining contact on my phone. Urgent leadership review. Data breach incident. They were trying to close the circle before the story spread further. Perfect. We rode the main elevator up with a group of mid-level managers who pretended not to recognize us. One woman clutched her tablet tighter and stared at the floor numbers. The doors opened onto the wide corridor. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see them all. Bram at the head of the long table, Gideon Vale lounging in his usual chair, with that polished, unreadable smile, Garrick standing behind him like a guard dog in a suit. The rest of the board and senior directors filled the seats. The same LED lights, the same polished oak, the same rain-streaked glass wall I had stood in front of yesterday. I pushed the double doors open. Every head turned. The room went still, except for the low hiss of the air conditioning. I walked straight to the center of the U-shaped table and placed the portable drive on the smooth wood with a quiet click. Vraka stopped beside me, shoulders square, amber eyes sweeping the room once before settling on Gideon. The borrowed coat made her look even taller under these lights. Bram's face flushed dark red. Vale, what the hell do you think you're— I'm presenting evidence, I said. My voice didn't shake. Unedited route logs, payment records, email chains, everything the company tried to bury. Gideon leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers steepled. His smile never reached his eyes. This is a private board meeting. You have no standing here. Security already knows we're here. Vraka cut in, voice low and steady. They let us walk in because they're watching every move. Same way they watched my father get removed. I plugged the drive into the projector port. The wall screen lit up. Files opened one by one. Timestamps that didn't match the official reports. Wire transfers to shell companies linked to border crews. Garrick's signature on 3 separate route changes that had ended in ambushes. My brother's convoy listed under acceptable loss. Murmurs rippled through the room like wind over dry grass. Gideon's smile thinned. Fabricated. An angry ex-employee and a Jinx looking for revenge. Classic. I opened the next folder. These are the original server copies, pulled 30 minutes ago from the sub-basement archive. You can check the metadata yourself. Yisradel's recorded statement played next, her gravelly voice filling the room as she described how she had been fired for flagging the same discrepancies 2 years earlier. Then Mara's statement, short and blunt, confirming the pattern of insurance fraud. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Garrick moved first. He stepped around the table's shoulders, bunched one hand already sliding inside his jacket toward the concealed holster every field security lead carried. Enough of this circus. I saw the moment he decided. His eyes flicked to Vraka, then to me. The same look he had given me in the conference room yesterday, only colder. He lunged. Not at the table, not at the drive, straight at Vraka. I moved without thinking. My shoulder slammed into her side, shoving her clear, as Garrick's fist whistled past where her jaw had been. The impact jarred my teeth. Pain flared across my collarbone. Vraka spun with the momentum, caught my arm, and steadied me in one fluid motion. Her grip was iron. Garrick recovered, drew the baton instead of the gun, smart enough not to fire in front of the entire board. He swung low, aiming for her knee. Vraka stepped inside the arc, caught his wrist and twisted. The baton clattered across the carpet. Someone shouted. Chairs scraped back. Bram was yelling for security, but the door stayed closed. The guards outside had clearly been told to wait. Gideon stood slowly, voice smooth as ever. This is exactly why she's dangerous. Look at her. Violent, unstable. Vraka didn't let go of Garrick's wrist. She spoke directly to the room, loud enough for every microphone to catch. I documented every change they made, every payment, every lie. They sold safe passage to criminals and let my people take the blame. They killed my father and called it an accident. And you, her eyes, found Gideon. You signed every transfer. Garrick tried to yank free. She held him long enough for two security officers to finally burst in. They grabbed him, but their eyes kept darting to me and Vraka, uncertain whose orders to follow now. I stepped forward again, breathing hard. The projector still glowed behind me, files open for everyone to see. I spent 3 years logging these routes and telling myself the numbers weren't my problem. I signed off on reports I knew felt wrong because it was easier than asking questions. That ends today. The board can investigate, or the city transport authority will do it for you. Either way, the files are already copied and waiting outside this building. Silence stretched. Bram wiped sweat from his upper lip. His eyes moved from the screen to Gideon to the two of us standing shoulder to shoulder in the middle of the wreckage. For the first time, he looked small. Security will escort Mr. Vale and Mr. Morn to holding, he said at last, voice hoarse. The rest of this meeting is suspended pending full internal audit, effective immediately. Gideon's polished mask cracked. Just for a second, long enough to see the fear underneath. Vraka released Garrick's wrist. He was dragged out, still snarling. The board members began to stand conversations breaking out in tight clusters. No one looked at us with the same contempt they had yesterday. Some looked afraid. Some looked ashamed. I felt Vraka's hand brush mine, brief, deliberate. Not for show. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we had made it this far together. The rain outside had thickened again, drumming against the glass like impatient fingers. I looked at the city lights smeared across the wet panes and realized the weight I had carried for 3 years felt different now. Not gone, but shared. We walked out of the conference room side by side, past the staring faces, past the security who no longer knew whether to stop us or salute us. The elevator ride down was quiet except for the soft chime of passing floors. When the doors opened on the lobby, the evening crowd parted around us like water around stone. Vraka spoke without looking over. You didn't have to come back here with me. I know I said. She glanced sideways. The cut on her cheek had opened again during the scuffle, a thin line of fresh red. Then why did you... I thought about the stones on the street. The way she had stood motionless in front of every camera yesterday. The way her fingers had closed around mine, around the USB in the warehouse. Because some things are worth choosing twice, I answered. The automatic doors slid open. Rain-cooled air rolled in. We stepped out together into the wet evening, the tower's lights glowing behind us like a dying star. Behind us, the company was already beginning to burn. Ahead of us, the city waited to see what would rise from the ashes. The rain had softened to a whisper by the time we reached the street. It clung to my skin in a fine mist, cool and steady, the kind that soaks through cloth without ever feeling like it's trying too hard. Vraka walked beside me, the borrowed coat dark with water at the shoulders, her boots leaving clean prints on the wet pavement. Neither of us spoke. The tower's lights reflected in long broken streaks behind us, but we didn't look back. The city moved on around us, taxis hissing past neon signs flickering above closed shops, the low hum of evening traffic carrying the scent of wet asphalt and distant street food. In the days that followed, the company unraveled in quiet, controlled stages. Internal audits ran 24 hours a day. Investigators from the City Transport Authority arrived in crisp suits and took over entire floors. Gideon Vale was escorted out of the building at dawn on the third day, his polished smile finally gone replaced by the blank stare of a man watching his empire of numbers collapse. Garrick followed 2 hours later, wrist-cuffed, still trying to glare at the cameras, as if rage could change the evidence now pinned to every server. The board issued statements full of carefully chosen words, restructuring accountability, new leadership, but the damage was done. Insurance claims were frozen. Contracts were reviewed. 3 major clients pulled out before the week ended. I received my termination notice through a polite email on the 5th morning. No severance beyond the legal minimum. Vraka's came the same day, delivered by courier, because no one in the building wanted to hand it to her in person. We read them together at Mara's workshop, sitting on metal stools while the kettle hissed on the workbench. The paper felt thin between my fingers, almost weightless, for something that had once defined my entire world. Mara watched us over the rim of her mug. "You two look like you've already decided what comes next." Vraka set her notice down. "We have." That night in the small back room of a noodle shop near the freight yards, we spread a city map across the scarred wooden table. Steam rose from 2 bowls between us, carrying the sharp bite of chili oil and garlic. The fluorescent bulb overhead buzzed softly, casting a yellow circle that left the edges of the room in shadow. I traced a new route with my finger north along the old Hemdaden corridor, but rerouted to avoid the blind spots that had cost so many lives. Vraka leaned in her shoulder, brushing mine, and marked 3 safe stopping points with a stub of pencil. Her handwriting was careful, almost deliberate, as if every line mattered. "We start small," she said. 2 trucks. Local hauls first. Then expand when the clans trust us. I nodded. The idea had formed slowly over the past nights, late conversations in the warehouse, quiet walks through the city after midnight, the way her voice would drop when she spoke about her father's old roots. It wasn't grand. It wasn't heroic. It was simply work that didn't require looking away. We signed the incorporation papers 3 weeks later in a cramped government office that smelled of ink and old coffee. The name we chose was simple: Greyline Logistics. No fanfare, just a small office above a repair garage that Mara helped us rent. The first truck arrived on a rainy Tuesday, secondhand, but solid, its engine rumbling like a promise. We spent the evening loading it together, crates of medical supplies for the Northern Clan's non-perishable food, a few sealed envelopes of official correspondence no one else would carry. Vraka's hands moved with the same quiet efficiency I had seen in the server room, checking straps, testing latches. When she caught me watching, she didn't look away. The farewell gathering at Blackscale happened a month after the scandal broke. The company threw it in the same conference room on the 18th floor, as if pretending the glass walls hadn't witnessed everything. I almost didn't go. Vraka convinced me with a single quiet sentence over breakfast. They need to see it end properly. The room looked smaller now, fewer people. The long table had been pushed against the wall to make space for a buffet of lukewarm finger food and cheap wine in plastic cups. Former colleagues nodded at me from across the room, some with awkward smiles, others with the kind of careful distance people keep around open flames. Gideon's and Garrick's chairs sat empty at the head table, their names already scrubbed from the plaques. I stood near the glass wall where rain still traced slow paths down the panes. Vraka stayed beside me, the new jacket we had bought together fitting her shoulders perfectly. The cut on her cheek had faded to a faint silver line, visible only when the light caught it at the right angle. Bram approached, first wineglass in hand, his face flushed. "Vale, we owe you an apology. The board has approved full compensation for the families affected, including your brothers." I met his eyes. "That's a start." He lingered a moment longer, searching for something to say, then moved on. Others followed in 2s and 3s, some offering handshakes, some muttering half-formed regrets. I accepted them all without warmth or anger. The past felt distant now, like a route we had already driven and left behind. When the room had thinned to a handful of people, I turned to Vraka. The city lights outside painted her face in soft gold and silver. I reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her temple, the gesture small and unhurried. She didn't pull away. "I have something to say," I told her. My voice carried across the quiet room. Heads turned. She raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth lifting in that familiar, almost smile. "Here, here." I took her hand-calloused palm against mine and faced the remaining faces. 3 months ago, I chose Vraka in this same room when no one else would. I did it because I was tired of looking away. Today I choose her again, not as an asset, not as compensation, as my partner in Greyline Logistics, as the person I want to build every future route with. If anyone still has a problem with that, the door is right there. Silence settled thick and complete. Then a single slow clap started from the back. Mara standing near the buffet, with a grin that pulled at her scar. More hands joined. Not everyone, but enough. Vraka's fingers tightened around mine. She leaned in until her forehead rested briefly against my temple, her breath warm against my skin. "You never do anything quietly," she murmured. "Only when it matters," I answered. We left the tower for the last time together, stepping into the night where the rain had finally stopped. The air smelled cleaner, sharper, like the city had exhaled after holding its breath too long. The months that followed moved in quiet rhythms. We drove the first official Greyline route together at the end of autumn, the truck cab filled with the low rumble of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. The road north wound through hills that turned gold under the late sun. Vraka rode shotgun, one boot propped on the dash, reading updated manifests aloud while I drove. At the overnight stop near the old border checkpoint, we shared a meal of grilled meat and flatbread cooked over an open fire. The flames painted shifting light across her face, highlighting the faint scar and the steady calm in her amber eyes. We talked about everything and nothing, the way her father used to check every strap twice, the nights I had spent staring at ceiling cracks, wondering if silence was the same as safety. Small things, how she liked her tea strong enough to stain the cup, how I preferred the window cracked even when it was cold. Touches came gradually, her hand resting on my shoulder when I checked the tires, my fingers brushing hers when we passed the coffee thermos. Nothing rushed, nothing performed, just the slow accumulation of days spent choosing the same road. On the final stretch of that first run, we pulled the truck onto a wide overlook above Valadorn. The city spread below us in a glittering net of lights, the Tower of Blackscale now just one building among many, no longer the center of anything. I killed the engine. The sudden quiet wrapped around us like a blanket. Vraka leaned forward, forearms on the dash, gazing down at the distant glow. "No one calls me the Jinx anymore," she said softly. I reached over and covered her hand with mine. They never should have. She turned her head. The scar on her cheek caught the last of the sunset, a thin line of silver against gray-green skin. Her eyes held mine without hesitation. "You chose me twice in front of the whole world. I figured it was time I chose you back." I felt the words settle somewhere deep behind my ribs, warm and certain. "Then we keep choosing," I said. "Every route, every morning, every time the road gets narrow." She smiled, then small, real, the kind that reached her eyes and stayed there. She leaned across the seat and kissed me slow and unhurried, tasting of the cool evening air and the faint salt of the day's work. When we pulled apart, her forehead rested against mine. "Drive safe," she whispered. I started the engine. The truck rolled forward, headlights cutting a steady path into the gathering dark. Behind us, Valadorn shrank to a cluster of lights. Ahead, the northern road stretched clear and open, the first of many we would build together. No one had called her the Orc Jinx in months, and I knew with the kind of certainty that doesn't need grand gestures that I would keep choosing her for the rest of every route we had left.